Action research question, I chose the title Guiding Complex Text to Success. My question was, how can I use guided reading with my fourth grade ELA students to increase comprehension of complex text as measured by the Reading Wonders FSA weekly assessments? Um, my elementary school, I teach two different classes. One, which is a gen ed class in the AM, which out of the 23 students, 23 of them are performing at or above proficiency. My afternoon class, my PM class, consists of 16 students, and of those 16 of them are performing below average. At the beginning of the year, we give a diagnostic test using the iReady program, which is an online resource that the students use in order to learn standards, the standards that the FSA is going to test in March. In my elementary school, I found that most of my fourth grade students struggled with complex text as tested on the FSA. The results gathered and shared at an October ICADS training, which was sponsored by the Miami-Dade Public Schools Office of Professional Development, further solidified my concern when looking closely at our school percentage of proficiency on the standards on the FSA. The standards that were tested were key ideas and details, craft and structure, integration of knowledge and ideas, and language and editing. The levels of proficiency are as follows. A level 1 and a 2 is considered to be unsatisfactory. A level 3 is considered satisfactory. A level 4 is considered above satisfactory. And a level 5 is considered mastering. One focus since the inception of the FSA has been students who scored a level 1 or 2, otherwise known as the lowest 20% of our school, were very difficult to help show an increase in their learning gains and proficiency. During the school year, students are given computerized assessments using a district purchased resource called iReady. This resource is closely modeled to represent the type of rigorous questioning that will be seen on the Florida State Assessment, as well as give the students practice on taking computerized tests, since students will be taking the computerized assessment for the first time. Schools are encouraged to use the data from this assessment to determine the students' projected outcome on the FSA. The first diagnostic assessment, otherwise known as the AP1, is given at the beginning of the year. For us, it was given the first week in September. Using the outcomes, teachers are expected to create groups for their guided instruction or guided reading groups. During this time, the teacher is responsible for guiding small group instruction, focusing on students' weaknesses. When I met with my principal in August, we discussed the scores that my PM class, which was my lower performing class, that consists of 16 students, all 16 being students that are at below average proficiency. The majority of them are on an an individual educationalized plan, which is an IEP or a 504. The difference between the two is that an IEP is given to a student who has a specific learning disability that has already been identified, whereas a 504 a 504 is accommodations that are given to students similar to the ones given to students that are on an IEP, but they don't have a specific learning disability. With that being said, when I met with my principal, we targeted my afternoon class. She asked me to go home and to think about ways that I can assist them, and I really believed that guided reading was the way to go because I've used it before, not to the rigorous extent that I began to use it this year, but I have always used guided reading because I model what I need the students to do. I teach it, we do it together. I do it, we do it, and then they do it, which is when they take their e-assessment. Their e-assessments are given bi-weekly because the district pacing guide has us teaching each story in our series, which is the Reading Wonders, for 2 weeks, 10 days. So every 10 days they get the FSA weekly e-assessment on the computer. This computerized test exposes them to what the FSA is going to look like because it is their first time taking any test on a computer. So I began my action research by conducting research, looking up everything that I possibly could on guided reading, the actual proper way to plan for it, the way to use it to explicitly teach my students. I did this in correlation with my pacing guides, which is provided by the district and is given to us to guide what we need to do, and it tells us how long we have to do it, and it gives us all the resources that we could possibly need to teach our students and get them to be up to par. So I was chosen in the summer to represent our grade level at an ICADS meeting. These meetings were conducted and put together by our district. We would go to these meetings and discuss with facilitators what we could do with our students to help them, what our scores for the FSA were last year, in the year before, so we could see where students were struggling. And across the board, students are just struggling with complex text. So we had to attack it from there. My goal was to prepare my students using guided reading through our Miami-Dade County Public Schools purchased Reading Wonders reading series and their FSA-styled e-assessments. This was one of the methods discussed at the ICADS trainings. Therefore, my method to preparing my students for the FSA was to use the rigor in guided reading and to see how much improvement was made when assessed using the Reading Wonders series e-assessments. For this reason, I decided to conduct my action research on the use of guided reading in conjunction with the Wonders e-assessments. My assumption was that using rigor in guided reading would assist my students in gaining proficiency on their Reading Wonders e-assessment. I planned to guide students' understanding of not just the text, but in understanding the rigorous questioning as well. My limitations were that I would not have results of my students' FSA scores before this paper would be due to compare with their third grade scores. Therefore, I decided that the best course of action would be to measure the students' success on their bi-weekly Wonders reading e-assessments. I planned to use two different styles of the Wonders e-assessment, but then I determined that using the Reading Wonders FSA weekly e-assessment was more than enough as long as I compared it from week 1 through week 10. I gave them 5 e-assessments after explicit instruction in my guided reading, and that was what I was using to see their increase. My reflection on the initial aspects of the action research were that I thought that I would overplan and have too many activities for the students to complete, not allowing for true comprehension and understanding to take place. Therefore, to avoid this scenario, when the 4th grade ELA teachers met to plan, we made a checklist of materials that we were to take with us to plan, so we would be able to collaboratively decide what we wanted to use and what we didn't want to use. This was extremely helpful because it didn't waste time. We got right to the point and we stayed focused and we knew exactly what we needed, what we didn't, and we just kept it very simple in terms of the planning, not in the instruction. So some of the materials we felt were imperative to the planning of this meaningful GR, guided reading instruction, were our Wonders teacher editions, our text structure worksheets, which comes with the reading, which actually comes linked, embedded in our district provided pacing guides, our weekly pacing guides that was created by the district, and any important supplemental activities that we've used in the past that we know help our students. We weeded this out through careful discussion and maybe included 1 or 2 outside resources. Most of these resources came from Teachers Pay Teachers, but they were specifically geared to the FSA and that type of rigor in questioning. Seeing as time was limited because I had to meet with 5 guided reading groups at least 3 to 4 times a week to ensure sufficient exposure to the GR lessons, my concise and purposeful planning was what truly allowed for the effective implementation to take place. My literature review was before implementing this action plan in my classroom, I had to research and gather more information about the e-assessments. The FSA weekly e-assessments test students with FSA wording and jargon, as well as more rigor in their questioning. After the district changed our reading series to Reading Wonders, I attended a few seminars to get familiar and with the text, as well as um, find all the benefits that could come or that did come with the switch to this new series. Over the last 2 years, the stress at these trainings has been to add more rigor to our teaching in order to prepare the students for the rigor of the FSA. Guided reading is a strategy in which the teacher mentors a child or a small group through the reading of a selection, drawing them into an exploration of the context and the words, the content and the words. Helping students understand the meaning of a reading passage, book, or novel is the key. The small group, ideally no more than 6, which being that I only had 16 students, my groups were very small, which was great. Should comprise students who are on the same level and need further work in similar reading areas. This was retrieved by pbs.org. Through my research, I learned that guided reading was a goal and a purpose for instruction. According to Fontes and Pennell, the goal of GR is to promote students, silent, independent reading, and increasingly challenging text. GR consists of small group lessons in which the primary activity is text reading and instruction is focused primarily on reading for meaning. The groups are composed of students who are able to read text on about the same level and use similar text processing strategies based on ongoing observations and assessments. The students are matched by level, and I think that they feel comfortable with each other, which I saw in my class was very helpful. In further review of the literature, I realized one essential component of my teaching that I would need to tweak was within the rigor of the complex text. In our Reading Wonders series, it does not have the rigor that we are going to see on the FSA. Therefore, it was up to me to use our district-provided planning cards that are given or that are by standard that the students need to master. We took these cards when we would meet in our planning, in our collaborative planning, and we would determine how we can make the questioning more rigorous. And in doing so, I know that helped my students. As stated by Maines and Julian Schultz, modeling is often observed in the classroom as an intentional practice, but the instructional time following the modeling was not always related to the modeling. I made it a point to be very concise in my modeling to the students. Modeled the way that I read in my head, the way that I looked for context clues, everything that I needed those students to know, I modeled for them so they can see it on a day-to-day basis. Now that I knew I would be using the guided reading to deliver my instruction, I began to research the Florida State Standards exam. I did research on it, but I had a lot of background information because when it came into play, I had done loads of research on the FSA in order to allow me the opportunity to better teach my students. What I found was that from the beginning of September, when I started my guided reading, until the last gathering of the FSA e-weekly assessment number 5, my students just made a steady increase. Every 2 weeks, those kids that were at a 0 to a 59% proficiency in the overall text of complex text just kept dwindling. Whereas I started with 12 kids that were below level, I wound up with students that honestly understood and knew how to apply the strategies that I had taught them in our guided reading. By the last FSA weekly e-assessment that I gave them before I had to put everything together for this action research project, I had only 3 students who were scoring at a 0 to 59% proficiency. And I had the majority of my students, which was 8 of them, scoring between a 70 and a 79%, which was amazing. I did only have 2 students that scored at a 80 to 100%, but I was just so happy with this that was more than enough. I do believe that this action research project did help me to amend my guided reading and use it more meaningfully to meet the needs of my students. My conclusion is that I was fortunate enough to have begun this action plan early, enough that I was able to see solid results. I have continued